In the third chapter of Genesis, we encounter one of the most mysterious and overlooked passages in the entire Bible. After the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, God places two enigmatic guardians at the eastern gate. These are the cherubim. The text states that God drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. For thousands of years, readers have passed over this verse without fully grasping its profound implications. Who were these cherubim? Where did they come from? And why does the biblical text present them without any introduction or explanation, as if the ancient readers already knew exactly what they were? The answer to these questions has been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath layers of religious tradition and centuries of misinterpretation. The truth is that the cherubim were not original creations of the Hebrew Bible. They were ancient beings that predated the Genesis account by more than 1,000 years. Their origins lie deep in the pagan civilizations of Mesopotamia, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the earliest human civilizations emerged. The cherubim began their existence not as angels of the Judeo-Christian God, but as protective deities of the Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. They were the guardians of temples, palaces, and sacred gates long before they appeared in the pages of Genesis. This is not speculation or theory. This is documented historical and archaeological fact. The very word cherub, in Hebrew keruv, has its etymological roots in the Akkadian language of ancient Mesopotamia. The Akkadian term karibu means intercessor, or one who blesses, and it was used specifically to describe protective spirits that guarded sacred spaces. These beings were known by various names across different Mesopotamian cultures. In Assyria, they were called Lamassu and Shedu, massive winged creatures with the bodies of bulls or lions and the heads of human males. These colossal statues, some standing over 20 feet tall, were placed at the entrances of royal palaces, throne rooms, and city gates. Their purpose was twofold: to protect the sacred space from unauthorized intrusion, and to inspire awe and fear in those who approached. The placement of these beings was always the same. They stood in pairs, flanking the entrance, facing forward to confront anyone who dared to enter. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this is precisely how the biblical text describes the cherubim at the gate of Eden. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. In 1845, the British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard discovered a magnificent marble Lamassu statue in Assur, Iraq, dating to the 8th century before the Common Era. This statue, now housed in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, provides us with a visual representation of what the ancient Israelites would have understood as cherubim. The Lamassu were not abstract spiritual concepts. They were concrete, physical representations of divine guardianship that dominated the architectural landscape of the ancient Near East. Every person living in that region during the time of the patriarchs and the Exodus would have been intimately familiar with these imposing figures. When the Hebrew scribes wrote about the cherubim in Genesis, they were invoking an image that their audience already knew. They did not need to explain what cherubim looked like or what they did, because everyone had seen them with their own eyes. But the connection goes even deeper than mere visual similarity. The theological function of these Mesopotamian guardians mirrors exactly the role assigned to the cherubim in Genesis. In Sumerian and Akkadian culture, the Lamassu and Shedu were associated with specific deities. Papsukal was the messenger god and the gatekeeper to the pantheon, the divine council of the gods. Ishum was a benevolent herald who led the gods in times of war. These beings were not merely decorative. They were understood to be living spiritual forces that mediated between the divine realm and the human world. They stood at the threshold, at the boundary between the profane and the sacred, preventing the unworthy from entering and ensuring that only those who had been properly initiated or authorized could pass through. This is precisely the function of the cherubim in Genesis. They are not there to comfort or guide humanity. They are there to exclude humanity, to bar the way back to the tree of life, to enforce God's decree of banishment. The most fascinating aspect of this connection is how seamlessly the Hebrew writers incorporated these pagan motifs into their sacred text. The cherubim appear in Genesis without fanfare or explanation, as if they were always part of the divine order. But this seamless integration is actually evidence of cultural borrowing and adaptation. The Israelites did not invent the concept of divine guardians. They inherited it from the surrounding cultures and reinterpreted it within their own monotheistic framework. This is not a weakness or corruption of the biblical text. It is a demonstration of how religious ideas evolve and transform as they pass from one culture to another. The ancient Israelites were not living in a vacuum. They were surrounded by powerful empires with sophisticated religious systems, and they absorbed and adapted elements of those systems into their own understanding of God and the divine order. Now, let us go even further back in time to the very origins of the cherubim concept in ancient Sumer. According to the research of biblical scholars who have traced these motifs to their earliest sources, the cherubim began their existence as two specific Sumerian deities, Nin-Gish-Zida and Dumuzi. These names may be unfamiliar to modern readers, but in ancient Mesopotamia, they were central figures in the mythology surrounding death, resurrection, and the afterlife. Nin-Gish-Zida, whose name means the steadfast tree, was a god associated with the underworld and with vegetation. He was depicted as a being who could assume different forms, sometimes appearing as a human with serpent dragon heads erupting from his shoulders, and other times transforming completely into a winged serpent dragon. Dumuzi, also known as Tammuz in later traditions, was the shepherd god and the divine lover of the goddess Inanna. Together, these two deities served as gatekeepers to the heavenly realm. The greatest deception regarding the cherubim and the serpent in Genesis is that they are enemies. This fundamental misunderstanding has shaped Christian theology for nearly 2,000 years. The cherubim are presented as the defenders of the divine order, while the serpent is cast as the ultimate deceiver and tempter. They appear to be in absolute opposition, locked in eternal conflict. But this interpretation is the product of dualistic thinking that has obscured the deeper, more nuanced reality encoded within the Genesis narrative. In the ancient pagan systems from which these symbols were borrowed, the cherubim and the serpent were never presented as opposites. They were complements. They were two expressions of a single cosmic force. To understand this, we must return to the Mesopotamian sources. In Sumerian and Akkadian mythology, the serpent dragon, known as the Tiamat in Babylonian tradition, or Labartu in Akkadian, was not merely an evil force to be defeated. It was a primordial power, the embodiment of chaos, transformation, and renewal. This creature was both creator and destroyer. It brought forth new life through the cycle of death and rebirth. The serpent was associated with immortality, with the shedding of skin, with regeneration and eternal becoming. In every ancient culture that employed serpent symbolism, from Sumer to Egypt to the Indian subcontinent, the serpent represented the same principle: the life force itself, the Kundalini energy that moves through all living things, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governs the universe. Now, when we examine the role of the cherubim in the Mesopotamian context, we see that they too were associated with this same transformative principle. The Lamassu and Shedu were not merely passive guardians. They were dynamic beings that embodied the transition between the profane and the sacred, between chaos and order, between potential and manifestation. They stood at the gate, at the threshold, and their function was to mediate between these opposing states. They were the keepers of the boundary, the enforcers of the sacred rules that governed entry into the divine realm. The ancient Mesopotamians understood that the cherubim and the serpent were two necessary expressions of the same cosmic law. The serpent represented the ascending force of evolution, the drive toward knowledge and experience and self-awareness. The cherubim represented the descending force of limitation and boundary, the necessity of form and structure and divine order. One without the other would be incomplete. One without the other would be chaos. This profound understanding becomes evident when we examine the tree of life symbolism, which appears in virtually identical forms across multiple ancient cultures. In Mesopotamian cosmology, in Hebrew Kabbalah, in Hindu and Buddhist traditions, and in the mystery schools of ancient Greece, the tree of life represents the same underlying reality, the process by which the infinite divine consciousness manifests itself into finite material existence. The tree has roots that reach toward heaven and branches that reach toward earth. It stands at the center of the cosmos, rooted in both the transcendent realm above and the material realm below. At the top of this tree, in the highest sphere, called Kether, or the crown, resides the unmanifest divine. At the bottom, in the sphere called Malkuth, or the kingdom, resides the material world. And at the very apex of the tree, at the gate between Kether and Chokmah, stands the flaming sword. The flaming sword is not an instrument of mere destruction. It is the barrier that separates the unmanifest from the manifest, infinity from finitude, the transcendent from the immanent. This sword is described in the Kabbalistic tradition as turning every way, which means it rotates continually, creating a barrier that can never be crossed by those who approach with insufficient spiritual development. The sword flares with fire, and this fire represents the inner motive that rules our thoughts and actions. It is the discriminative principle, the ability to distinguish between truth and illusion, between the essential and the non-essential. For the seeker on the spiritual path, the flaming sword is not an obstacle to be feared. It is a test to be overcome. It separates the wheat from the chaff, the sincere spiritual aspirant from the casual observer. Those who have undergone the necessary purification and development can pass through the barrier and reclaim access to the tree of life. But for those who remain attached to material desires and selfish interests, the sword turns them away. Now, let us understand the profound significance of the placement of the cherubim on either side of the flaming sword. The text of Genesis does not explicitly state that there were two cherubim, yet every representation in Jewish and Christian tradition portrays them as two. This is not an accidental detail. The two cherubim represent the duality of manifestation. In Kabbalistic symbolism, the two cherubim correspond to the two pillars that frame the tree of life, the pillar of severity on the right and the pillar of mercy on the left. These two pillars represent the fundamental duality of creation, contraction and expansion, limitation and infinity, form and formlessness. Every manifest thing in the universe exists as a result of the tension between these two opposing forces. Neither is superior to the other, neither is evil and the other good. They are complementary, necessary expressions of the creative principle. The serpent that tempted Eve in the garden represents the pillar of severity, the principle of limitation and individual will. It offered knowledge, but a knowledge that came through personal experience and individual choice, separate from the unified will of God. It was the force that said no to the universal law, that asserted the right of the individual to possess wisdom, to cross the boundary, to assert personal will over divine will. The cherubim, standing with the flaming sword, represent the pillar of mercy, the principle of universal law and divine order. They do not merely punish or exclude. They maintain the sacred boundary that allows for the continuation of creation. They ensure that the process of evolution unfolds according to divine pattern, not according to human whim. When Adam and Eve consumed the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they did not simply commit a sin in the moral sense that Christian theology has portrayed. They made a choice that was, from one perspective, a violation of the divine order, a transgression that carried consequences, but from another perspective, deeper and more profound, they initiated a necessary phase in the cosmic evolution of consciousness. They stepped out of the state of unconscious unity with the divine and entered into the state of conscious self-awareness. They achieved what the serpent promised. They gained knowledge. They became able to distinguish between good and evil, but they also fell into a state of suffering, separation, and mortal limitation. This is not a curse in the traditional sense. It is a necessary phase in the spiritual development of the human being. The expulsion from Eden is therefore not the end of the story. It is the middle of the story. The two cherubim and the flaming sword are not there to prevent humanity from ever returning to the garden. They are there to ensure that when humanity does return, they return transformed, purified, and evolved. In the Kabbalistic system, which preserves the ancient Mesopotamian wisdom in coded form, the journey from Malkuth back to Kether follows a path marked with trials and transformations. The seeker must ascend through multiple stages of consciousness, each one more refined than the last, until they eventually reach the state where they can safely enter the presence of the absolute divine. The flaming sword, which turns every way, blocks the path to those who are not ready, but it also illuminates the way for those who are. It is both barrier and beacon, both restriction and revelation. The ancient pagan religions understood this mystery. They knew that the gods, the cherubim, and the serpents were not in opposition, but in dance. They were locked in an eternal cosmic drama that renewed itself with each cycle of creation and destruction. The gardeners of the ancient temple complexes, when they carved the Lamassu and Shedu into the entrance gates, understood that they were not creating mere decoration. They were establishing a sacred boundary, a threshold where transformation occurred. When pilgrims approached these gates, they knew they were about to enter a realm where different laws applied. They knew that what they had been before entering would not be the same as what they would be after. They knew that the guardians represented both protection and initiation. The ignorant saw only fearsome creatures designed to frighten away the profane. The initiated understood that the guardians were there to escort the worthy into deeper mysteries. The revelation becomes even more profound when we examine a lesser-known passage in the book of Exodus that provides us with the second crucial reference to the cherubim in the Hebrew scriptures. The text describes in precise detail the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, that sacred object that would become the very throne of God in the Jerusalem temple. On top of this ark, resting upon a golden covering called the mercy seat, were to be placed two golden cherubim. But the description of their positioning is extraordinary. The cherubim were to be placed so that their faces looked one toward another across the mercy seat. Their wings were spread upward, overshadowing the center space between them. This space between the two cherubim was understood to be the precise location where the presence of God dwelled. God promised to meet with Moses and the high priest in that very space, suspended between the two guardian beings. This is not accidental. This detail reveals a cosmic secret that has been preserved in religious symbolism for thousands of years. The significance of this configuration cannot be overstated. The two cherubim facing each other across the mercy seat represent something far deeper than mere decoration or symbolic protection. In the ancient Near Eastern cosmological understanding, which the Hebrew writers fully inherited, the space between opposing forces is where creation occurs. The tension between two equal and opposite powers generates the energy from which all manifest reality emerges. In Hindu and Tantric philosophy, this same principle is called the binding of Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and feminine principles in eternal dance. In Chinese cosmology, it is the balance of yin and yang. In Mesopotamian texts, it is the union of Anu, the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess, which produces everything that exists between them. The mercy seat, suspended between the two cherubim, is thus not merely a seat of judgment. It is the point of equilibrium, where the infinite becomes finite, where the transcendent enters into relationship with the material world. This interpretation is confirmed and amplified when we turn to the most extraordinary vision in all of Hebrew scripture, the opening chapter of the book of Ezekiel. The prophet Ezekiel, living in exile in Babylon, describes a vision of the divine chariot, called in Hebrew the Merkabah. This vision was not born in a vacuum. Ezekiel was surrounded by the living symbolism of Mesopotamian religious architecture. He saw daily the colossal Lamassu and Shedu that guarded the entrances of palaces and temples. He would have been intimately familiar with Mesopotamian astrology and cosmology. When he received his vision, it was translated into the visual language he knew. He beheld 4 extraordinary creatures, each one a hybrid, being combining the features of multiple animals. Each creature had the face of a man, the face of a lion, the the face of an ox and the face of an eagle. They each had 2 pairs of wings. Their legs were described as straight, ending in hooves, like a calf. Above these creatures was a crystal-like expanse, and above the expanse sat a throne, and upon the throne was a figure that resembled a human being, radiating such intense light that Ezekiel could barely perceive it. These 4 creatures in Ezekiel's vision are explicitly identified as cherubim in the 10th chapter of Ezekiel's prophecy. They are not the same as the 2 cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant, yet they are closely related. The 4 creatures represent an expansion and elaboration of the cherubim concept. In fact, they represent the same cosmic principle, working at 4 different levels or dimensions simultaneously. The curious detail about the 4 faces corresponds to an ancient astronomical tradition. The historian of religions Joseph Campbell, who spent decades studying comparative mythology and symbolism, discovered that in the earliest period of Mesopotamian astronomy, 4 key points in the zodiac were marked by 4 cardinal animals. The bull marked the spring equinox and the eastern quarter. The lion marked the summer solstice and the southern quarter. The eagle, later associated with Scorpio, marked the autumn equinox and the western quarter. And the 4th creature, represented variously as the water carrier, the human, or the angel, marked the winter solstice and the northern quarter. These 4 signs marked the great cycles of cosmic time, the turning wheel of the zodiac that governs all manifest creation. The cherubim, therefore, are not merely spiritual beings in the sense of disembodied entities. They are conscious principles that govern the fundamental structure of the cosmos itself. They embody the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, and the 4 cardinal points of human consciousness. When Ezekiel beheld them, he was seeing the very machinery through which God governs the universe. They are the pillars upon which the throne of divine authority rests. They are simultaneously the guards of that throne and the mechanism through which divine will is transmitted to all creation. The Merkabah, the divine chariot, is the vehicle through which God moves in the cosmos. It is not stationary. It is not locked to a single location. It moves according to the will of the divine, yet it is always guided and governed by the cherubim. This mobility is extraordinarily significant. In the ancient temple system of Israel, there was a temptation to believe that God was confined to the temple building, that the divine could be possessed and controlled through ritual performance and correct religious practice. But Ezekiel's vision came precisely at the moment when this illusion was being shattered. Jerusalem had fallen to Babylon. The temple had been destroyed. The nation was in exile. And in that moment of devastation, Ezekiel received the revelation that God was not confined to any building, to any geography, to any political system. The divine presence could travel, could manifest anywhere, could meet the people of God even in exile. The cherubim guaranteed this. They ensured that the throne of God remained mobile, free, and capable of reaching the faithful wherever they were scattered. This is a profoundly mystical understanding that has been largely lost in modern religious practice. Now, let us return to the esoteric principle that underlies the entire system. In all the ancient mystery schools, whether in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, or the Levantine cultures, there existed a fundamental doctrine concerning the path of spiritual initiation. This path was understood as a movement from the external, material realm toward the inner, spiritual realm. It was conceived as a journey from profane ignorance to sacred knowledge, from chaos to cosmos, from death to resurrection. Every step along this path was guarded. Every threshold had to be crossed. And at every threshold, there stood guardians. These guardians were not there primarily to keep people out. Rather, they were there to test the worthiness of those who sought to proceed further. They were there to ensure that those who entered sacred space had undergone the necessary purification and development. The anthropologist Victor Turner and his predecessor Arnold van Gennep studied the phenomenon of liminality in ancient rituals and initiatory traditions. They discovered that liminality is the threshold state that exists between two different modes of being. The word liminal comes from the Latin limen, which means threshold. In a liminal state, the initiate is neither fully in the profane world nor fully in the sacred world. They are betwixt and between. In this state, they are vulnerable, malleable, capable of transformation. The liminal space is dangerous because in it, the ordinary rules do not apply. One is susceptible to divine influence, to spiritual forces, to profound inner change. The guardians at the threshold regulate passage through this dangerous space. They do not allow just anyone to enter into the liminal state. The unprepared could be destroyed by exposure to forces beyond their comprehension. But those who have been properly prepared, those who have undergone the necessary preliminary purifications and training, are allowed to proceed. Once they pass through the threshold, under the guidance and protection of the guardians, they emerge transformed into a new state of being. They carry new knowledge, new powers, new responsibilities. The cherubim guarding the tree of life in the Genesis narrative are performing this same function. They are not merely preventing return to Eden. They are regulating passage through the most dangerous threshold of all, the boundary between the human realm and the divine realm. Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden because they were not yet ready for the next stage of initiation. They had eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but they had not yet undergone the purification and suffering that would prepare them to eat from the tree of life. The path back to the tree of life requires a journey, a descent into the depths of human experience, an ascent through stages of consciousness, and the development of certain spiritual capacities. Only then can the cherubim step aside and allow the purified soul to access the fruit that grants immortality. This understanding resolves what has always been a troubling contradiction in Christian theology. If God is infinitely merciful and loving, why does he keep humans away from the very source of eternal life? Why maintain such a strict barrier? The answer is that the barrier is not arbitrary or merely punitive. It is protective. It is merciful in its own way. A human being unprepared for direct contact with the divine would be annihilated by that contact. The light of God would consume them, as flame consumes a piece of paper. The power of eternity would fragment their psyche. The knowledge of the absolute would shatter the finite structures of their consciousness. The cherubim, with the flaming sword, are merciful guardians. They prevent a tragic destruction by enforcing a necessary separation until the time of readiness arrives. In the mystical traditions of Jewish Kabbalah, which preserves these ancient Mesopotamian mysteries in coded form, the journey from the lowest sphere, called Malkuth, up through the tree of life toward the highest sphere called Kether, is understood as a systematic process of spiritual development. Each sphere represents a stage of consciousness, Each path connecting the spheres represents a test or initiation. The cherubim appear at the crucial transition points, ensuring that the aspirant does not advance too rapidly, does not take on challenges for which they are unprepared. The guardians of the threshold are ultimately there for the benefit of those who seek to pass beyond. They are the midwives of spiritual rebirth. Having established the historical and mythological origins of the cherubim, we must now address the most profound mystery of all, the relationship between the cherubim and human consciousness itself. The guardians of Eden are not merely ancient symbols preserved in religious texts. They are active principles within the structure of human awareness and spiritual development. To understand this requires us to examine what the ancient mystery schools called the stages of initiation, the phases through which a human being must progress in order to evolve from a state of unconscious separation from the divine to a state of conscious reunion and illumination. This path has been encoded in virtually identical form in the mysteries of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and the Near East. The cherubim appear repeatedly at each critical threshold of this initiatory journey. Consider the geography described in Genesis with new understanding. After the expulsion, Adam and Eve do not disappear into an undefined wilderness. The text indicates they dwelled outside the garden, but still in Eden, in the vicinity of the cherubim who stood at the eastern gate. East is a direction with profound significance in ancient temple architecture and mystical practice. East is the direction of the rising sun, the direction of rebirth, and the beginning of a new cycle. East is where the light enters. In the planning of the Hebrew tabernacle, and later the Jerusalem temple, the entrance always faced east. This was not mere architectural preference. It was an intentional encoding of cosmic principles. The worshipper approaching from the west faced the rising sun as they entered the sacred precinct. They moved from darkness into light, from the profane into the sacred, in harmony with the cosmic rhythms that governed all existence. The cherubim stood as guardians of this eastward threshold. They did not exist in some distant heaven separated from human experience. They existed at the boundary between the human realm and the sacred realm, accessible yet protected, inviting yet restricting. The story of Cain and Abel, which follows immediately after the expulsion narrative, provides a crucial insight into this ongoing relationship between humanity and the cherubim. Both brothers brought offerings to God, and the narrative indicates they were making these sacrifices at the sanctuary that existed near the cherubim at the gate of Eden. This detail is extraordinary. It means the cherubim were not merely historical figures placed at a past event. They were active participants in the religious life of the post-expulsion human community. They were present and accessible. The point of contact with the divine did not disappear with the closing of the garden. Rather, a new form of contact was established through ritual sacrifice, performed in the presence of the cherubim. Cain brought the fruit of the ground. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the best portions, the fat, the precious first yield. And we are told that God had regard for Abel's offering, but not for Cain's. The esoteric tradition preserves a teaching about why Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's rejected. It was not a matter of arbitrary divine preference. Rather, it concerned the nature of consciousness and intention that lay behind each offering. Abel, as the keeper of flocks, had undertaken the difficult work of tending animals, guiding them, developing relationship with them, and in time, offering the best of what had been entrusted to his care. This required surrender, sacrifice, the willingness to part with what was precious. It required the development of compassion and the ability to see oneself in the creature that was being offered. It required what the ancient traditions called a pure heart. Cain, by contrast, merely brought some of the fruit of his labor, with no indication that it represented his finest work or greatest effort. His offering was not given in the spirit of self-transcendence, but in the spirit of propriety, a mere performance of what was expected. The difference between the two offerings was not the commodity offered, but the state of consciousness within the offerer. Abel had achieved a degree of inner development and purity that allowed his offering to be received by the divine. Cain had not, and when Cain was rejected, he became angry. This anger, this resentment at exclusion from divine favor, led him to commit the first murder in human history. He killed Abel. This tragic narrative preserves an essential truth about the initiatory path. Not everyone who approaches the threshold of sacred knowledge will be able to pass through. Not everyone will be willing to undergo the transformation that the threshold demands. Some will resist. Some will become hostile to those who have achieved what they have not. The cherubim do not merely guard against the unworthy. They reveal the unworthiness through their discrimination. They serve as mirrors that reflect the state of consciousness of those who approach. For those with pure hearts and evolved consciousness, the cherubim reveal the path forward. For those with ego, resentment, and unworthy intention, the cherubim reveal blockage and exclusion. This is their function. This is their mercy. By refusing access to those not yet ready, the cherubim prevent catastrophic spiritual consequence. To consume from the tree of life in a state of impurity and malevolence would not be a blessing. It would be a curse. It would grant power to someone incapable of using it rightly. This is why the cherubim stand with the flaming sword. The sword is not merely a weapon of exclusion. It is a tool of purification. It burns away the dross of ego and selfish desire. We must understand now that the cherubim function at multiple levels of reality simultaneously. On the historical and mythological level, they were ancient Near Eastern guardian beings, incorporated into the Hebrew religious tradition. On the architectural and ritualistic level, they were represented in the temple system and presided over the sacrificial offerings through which human beings attempted to maintain covenant relationship with the divine. On the psychological level, they represent the discriminative function of consciousness, the ability to distinguish between the true and the false, the worthy and the unworthy within oneself. On the cosmic level, they are actual beings, intelligent, conscious entities that exist in dimensions of reality that extend far beyond our ordinary perception. They are what are called in Sanskrit the Mahabhuts, the great luminous intelligences that preside over the affairs of planets and star systems. They are zodiacal beings, as Ezekiel's vision clearly demonstrates. The 4 cherubim correspond to the 4 cardinal signs of the zodiac in their ancient form. They oversee the cycles of cosmic time and the evolution of consciousness throughout the ages. This multi-level interpretation is not a modern invention or a misunderstanding of ancient texts. It is the actual method of interpretation preserved in the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, which teaches the doctrine of the four worlds. The highest world is called Atziluth, the world of emanation, where pure divine essence resides in undifferentiated unity. Below it is Bria, the world of creation, where the first differentiation occurs and archetypal principles begin to manifest. Below that is Yetzirah, the world of formation, where these archetypal principles assume increasingly specific forms. And finally, at the bottom is Asiya, the world of action, the material universe where all these principles take concrete, physical expression. Every symbol in the Hebrew Bible, properly understood, carries meaning at all four of these levels simultaneously. The cherubim at the gate of Eden function at all four levels. They are pure, divine principle in the world of emanation. They are archetypal, cosmic principles in the world of creation. They are psychological and transformative principles in the world of formation. And they are represented physically through temple architecture and ceremonial practice in the world of action. To understand the complete truth of the cherubim requires perceiving their manifestation through all four levels. Now, let us connect this understanding to the grand sweep of cosmic history as preserved in the mystery traditions. Humanity began in a state of innocence and unconsciousness, dwelling in the Garden of Eden in unity with the divine. This was not paradise in the sense of earthly comfort, but rather a state in which individual will and divine will were not yet differentiated. The human was not a distinct, self-aware being, but merely a reflection of the divine consciousness. The serpent and the fruit brought knowledge, self-awareness, the ability to know oneself as separate from others and from God. This was a fall, but it was a necessary fall. It was the birth of individual consciousness. It was the beginning of the human journey toward becoming not merely a reflection of the divine, but a co-creator with the divine, a being capable of freely choosing virtue, capable of achieving genuine love through the exercise of will, rather than through mere unconscious unity. The expulsion from the garden was therefore not merely punishment, it was initiation. The cherubim stand at the gate to oversee the next phases of this vast initiatory cycle. Between the expulsion and the present day, humanity has passed through multiple epochs, each one bringing a higher development of consciousness and understanding. The ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt represent particular phases in humanity's collective evolution. The mystery schools of Greece and Rome represent a further development. The religions of Abraham, Christianity, and Islam represent subsequent stages. Each stage brings humanity higher and closer to the tree of life, preparing for a time when the barrier will be lowered and humanity as a whole will have evolved sufficiently to reclaim access to the fruit of immortality. The cherubim do not remain static. They themselves evolve as humanity evolves. This is the great mystery that connects the ancient to the modern, the pagan to the spiritual, the cosmic to the human. The two cherubim specifically represent the dual movement that governs this evolution. One cherubim represents the principle of restriction, the maintenance of boundaries, the enforcement of sacred law, the saying of no to those who are not yet ready. This is necessary because without structure, without initiation, without tests that reveal and develop worthiness, humanity would collapse into chaos. The other cherubim represents the principle of mercy, guidance, compassion, the opening of the way for those who have been purified and prepared. This is necessary because without progression, without the possibility of advancement and transformation, humanity would stagnate. Between these two principles, the entire cosmic drama unfolds. Between them, the flaming sword turns, burning away illusion, purifying intention, perfecting understanding. And at the center, invisible to all but those whose consciousness has evolved sufficiently to perceive it, is the way to the tree of life, ever present, ever accessible to those who have become worthy of its fruit. The most astonishing discovery in the study of the cherubim is not merely their historical origins or their symbolic meanings. It is the discovery that this knowledge has been deliberately preserved, encoded, hidden, and transmitted across centuries by specific lineages of initiates and esoteric schools. The truth about the cherubim and their role in human spiritual evolution was not lost. It was deliberately concealed. It was veiled in mystery and mystery school traditions precisely because it was too powerful, too revolutionary, too threatening to those who sought to control human consciousness through literalistic, religious interpretation. Understanding how this knowledge was preserved and transmitted is essential to fully grasping the message that the cherubim carry for our time. The mechanism through which this knowledge was hidden is called the doctrine of levels of interpretation. This doctrine is preserved most clearly in the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, though it existed in virtually identical form in the mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and throughout the ancient world. According to this doctrine, every authentic spiritual text contains multiple levels of meaning. The most superficial level is called the literal or historical level. At this level, the text is read as a simple narrative describing actual events that occurred in real time and space. This level is perfectly valid for those at the beginning of their spiritual development. It provides moral lessons and establishes basic religious practice. But there is a second level, called the allegorical level, in which the historical narrative is understood as a code, with each character and event representing psychological principles, spiritual truths, or cosmic principles. At this level, Adam and Eve are understood not merely as historical ancestors, but as symbols of the human condition. The serpent is understood not merely as a literal animal, but as the principle of temptation or the awakening of individual consciousness. The cherubim are understood not merely as historical guardians, but as cosmic principles governing consciousness and cosmic structure. Then there is a third level, called the mystical or esoteric level, at which the entire narrative is understood as a map of the internal spiritual landscape of the human being and the process through which an individual consciousness unfolds its latent divine potential. At this level, the Garden of Eden is not merely a place, but a state of consciousness, the state of primordial unity, before the split into subject and object, observer and observed. The serpent and the fall represent the necessary phase in which consciousness develops individual self-awareness and creative power. The cherubim represent the protective and directive forces that guide the human being through this process of development. The return to the garden and the eating of the fruit of the tree of life represent the ultimate goal of all spiritual practice, the reunion of individual consciousness with the universal consciousness, achieved not through abandoning individual awareness, but through transcending the illusion of separation while maintaining the capacity for choice and creative action. Finally, there is a fourth level called the Kabbalistic or unitive level, which most scholars and theologians have never accessed because it requires not merely intellectual understanding, but direct spiritual experience. At this level, the text is seen as a communication from the divine consciousness itself, encoded in a form that can transmit knowledge directly from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness, bypassing the rational mind entirely. To read the text at this level is to undergo a transformation. The cherubim at this level are not described but encountered. They are not symbols that represent something else, but presences that embody the principle they instantiate. This level cannot be taught through books. It can only be transmitted from master to disciple in a direct person-to-person transmission of initiation. The medieval Kabbalist Nachmanides, one of the greatest authorities in Jewish mystical tradition, explicitly taught that there was knowledge about the divine mysteries that could not be written down or communicated through ordinary speech. He insisted that certain teachings could only be transmitted mouth to mouth, master to disciple, in an unbroken chain that stretched back through the generations to Moses himself. Nachmanides and his successors were not being arbitrary or secretive for the sake of maintaining power. They understood something fundamental about the nature of spiritual knowledge that modern civilization has almost entirely forgotten. They understood that true knowledge of divine reality cannot be transmitted through words. Words operate at the level of conceptual thought, but divine reality transcends conceptual thought. To attempt to communicate it through words creates distortion. The words become barriers rather than bridges. They confuse rather than clarify. Therefore, the ancient masters developed an esoteric method in which texts were written in such a way that they would be understood literally by those at the beginning of the path, but would yield progressively deeper meanings as the reader's consciousness evolved. The texts themselves became tools for developing consciousness. The reader would meditate on the text, contemplate its meanings, allow the symbols to work on their psyche, and gradually their understanding would deepen without ever requiring an external teacher to explain it to them. This is precisely the function of the cherubim narratives in Genesis. For the ordinary believer, the story is straightforward. God created a garden, placed Adam and Eve there, they sinned, they were expelled, and cherubim guard the way back. This narrative provides moral instruction. It explains why humans suffer. It establishes the need for redemption through obedience to God. All of this is valid at the literal level. But as the reader's consciousness develops and they begin to contemplate the deeper meanings, new levels of understanding emerge. The reader begins to see that the narrative describes a necessary phase in cosmic evolution, that the serpent and the cherubim play complementary roles, that the expulsion from the garden is not merely punishment, but initiation into a higher stage of development. And if the reader's consciousness evolves further, they may perceive that the narrative is actually a precise map of the chakra system, the energy centers within the human body, and the path through which Kundalini energy ascends from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, awakening dormant capacities and establishing connection with the divine source. The text remains exactly the same, but its meaning transforms as the consciousness of the reader transforms. Now, we must address the profound challenge that emerged in the history of Christianity. In the first centuries after the death of Jesus, there existed multiple branches of Christianity, many of which preserved the mystery school teachings that Jesus himself had transmitted in parables and esoteric instruction. The Gnostic Christians, who are one such branch that we know about through the discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts, maintained that the God described in the Old Testament was not the highest God, but rather a demiurge, a lower deity who had created the material world in a state of ignorance. According to Gnostic interpretation, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was not evil, but benevolent. The serpent represented Sophia, the divine wisdom, who attempted to awaken Adam and Eve from their state of unconscious servitude to the ignorant demiurge. The cherubim, from the Gnostic perspective, were not servants of the true God, but servants of the false God, the demiurge, and they blocked humanity's access to true knowledge. This interpretation, while not the view we have been developing, nonetheless preserves the understanding that the narrative is encoded and multi-layered. The Gnostics understood that one cannot read Genesis with a simplistic, literalistic approach. One must understand that it contains hidden teachings that contradict the apparent surface meaning. The Orthodox Christian authorities recognized that these Gnostic interpretations were a threat to their institutional power and control. By establishing the literal, historical reading as the only acceptable interpretation, by suppressing Gnosticism as heretical, by burning texts and executing those who taught alternative interpretations, the authorities essentially shut down the entire category of esoteric knowledge that had been preserved since ancient times. What had been a living transmission of spiritual practices and direct experiences of the divine was reduced to a set of doctrines to be believed rather than mysteries to be experienced. Yet despite this suppression, the esoteric traditions were never completely destroyed. They survived in various underground forms. The Jewish Kabbalistic tradition preserved them in encoded form. Sufi Islam preserved them in ecstatic mysticism and poetry. Hidden mystery schools continued to initiate worthy students in the teachings, and gradually, over the centuries, fragments of the ancient knowledge began to re-emerge in literature, philosophy, and spiritual movements. The Hermetic traditions, which claimed to preserve the teachings of Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus, maintained that all the great religious traditions contained the same underlying truths, expressed in culturally adapted forms. The Renaissance brought a rediscovery of Platonic philosophy and the Hermetic texts, which reignited interest in the ancient mystery teachings. The Rosicrucian movements, the Freemasons, and other esoteric organizations carried forward the transmission of knowledge about the sacred geometry, the symbolism of light and darkness, the process of initiation, and the evolution of human consciousness toward divine realization. The crucial point is that the knowledge about the cherubim as ancient pagan guardians and cosmic principles was never lost. It was preserved. It was taught in hidden circles. It was encoded in symbols and architecture. It was transmitted from master to student through initiatory experiences. And all of this was happening in the shadows, while the literalistic, institutional religions dominated the masses. The temples of the Mediterranean world contained sculptures and reliefs depicting figures that in their essence were identical to the cherubim. The great cathedrals of medieval Christianity were designed according to principles of sacred geometry that embody the same cosmic truths that were encoded in the description of the tabernacle and the temple in ancient Israel, which themselves encoded the principles of the cosmic structure as understood in ancient Mesopotamia. The architects knew, the initiates knew, the mystery school teachers knew, but this knowledge was carefully kept from the general population, not out of malice, but out of recognition that knowledge of this magnitude cannot be safely entrusted to those who have not undergone the necessary spiritual preparation and purification. This is not a claim that should be controversial or suspicious. Consider the example of modern science. When a researcher discovers a dangerous substance or develops a destructive technology, that knowledge is not immediately released to the general population. It is restricted. It is given only to those who have been trained in its proper use. This same principle applies to esoteric knowledge, the knowledge about how consciousness works, how to awaken dormant capacities, how to perceive beyond the limitations of the ordinary senses, how to access states of consciousness that can transform one's entire experience of reality. This knowledge, in the hands of the unprepared, the spiritually immature, or the morally corrupt, could cause serious harm. It could be used for manipulation and control. It could create states of psychological confusion or fragmentation. It could open channels to forces that one is not ready to encounter. The ancient masters understood this. They created the system of initiation precisely to ensure that only the prepared would receive such knowledge. The cherubim are, in their esoteric function, the guardians of this essential boundary. They protect not by excluding, but by ensuring that those who pass beyond are capable of handling what they encounter. Today, we are living at a unique moment in human history. The knowledge that was once confined to mystery schools and esoteric circles is beginning to emerge into the public domain. The texts that were hidden are being discovered and translated. The symbols and codes are being deciphered. The lineages of initiation are becoming publicly known. This is not an accident. It is part of the cosmic evolution. Humanity is being prepared for a transition. The veil is being lifted. The ancient pagan truths about the cherubim and the cosmic structure are being revealed because humanity is approaching a threshold in its collective development. We are moving into a phase where the distinction between the profane and the sacred, between the initiated and the uninitiated, between secret knowledge and public knowledge, is beginning to dissolve. This does not mean that all knowledge becomes available to all people, regardless of their development. Rather, it means that the opportunity for knowledge is becoming more widely available. The individual must still make the choice to pursue it. The individual must still undergo the necessary discipline and purification, but the barriers are becoming more permeable. The cherubim are beginning to lower the flaming sword. The gateway to the tree of life is beginning to open, not for all at once, but progressively, as more and more human beings take responsibility for their own spiritual development and evolution. We now arrive at the most urgent and immediate message encoded within the symbolism of the cherubim. The guardians of Eden are not merely relics of ancient mythology or historical curiosities. They are living principles that are active in the present moment. We are approaching a critical threshold in human history, a moment when the ancient wisdom is being recovered and the knowledge that was hidden is being revealed. The cherubim are beginning to lower the flaming sword. The barrier between the sacred and the profane, between the initiated and the uninitiated, between ancient pagan truth and contemporary understanding, is becoming permeable. This is not coincidence. This is the unfolding of a cosmic plan that was set in motion thousands of years ago. The evidence for this transformation is everywhere for those with eyes to see. Throughout the world, there is an unprecedented awakening of consciousness. Millions of people are abandoning literalistic, dogmatic forms of religion and seeking direct experience of the divine. Meditation and yoga, practices rooted in the ancient mysteries of Asia, are being practiced by hundreds of millions of people in the secular West. Archaeology is revealing the hidden truths of ancient civilizations. The Nag Hammadi texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the recovered Gnostic Gospels are becoming available to ordinary people. The internet has made esoteric knowledge accessible to anyone with the desire to search for it. Technology is allowing the preservation and transmission of wisdom that was previously available only through oral tradition or in restricted circles. The barriers that kept the masses in ignorance are crumbling. The veil is lifting. The time of the closed mystery schools is ending. The time of the democratization of sacred knowledge is beginning. Yet this awakening has not happened smoothly or without resistance. The institutional structures that benefited from the monopoly on sacred knowledge have fought back with every weapon at their disposal. Religious fundamentalism has hardened. Political authorities have become more authoritarian. The mechanisms of control through fear, division, and ignorance have become more sophisticated and more pervasive. The modern technological apparatus has been turned into an instrument of surveillance and behavioral manipulation that would seem like science fiction to the ancients. And yet, paradoxically, this same technology has also become a tool for liberation. The power of connection, the ability to share information instantly across the globe, the availability of knowledge that was once locked away in libraries and hidden in mystery schools, has created a situation unprecedented in human history. The cherubim cannot maintain the barrier anymore. The knowledge is out. The truth is spreading. The question now is, what will humanity do with this knowledge? Here is where we must understand the prophecies preserved in the mystery traditions. They speak of an ending and a beginning. They speak of an old world passing away and a new world being born. They speak of the seventh seal, the fifth dimension, the age of Aquarius, the second coming of Christ. These are not literal apocalyptic predictions of fire and destruction falling from the sky. They are descriptions of a phase transition in human consciousness. Just as an individual human being undergoes transformations at different life stages, just as the caterpillar undergoes a complete dissolution before emerging as a butterfly, so humanity itself is undergoing a fundamental transformation. The old structures, based on hierarchy, domination, separation, and fear, are dissolving. New structures based on cooperation, equality, integration, and love are being born. The cherubim are not stopping this process. They are guiding it. They are ensuring that it unfolds according to the divine pattern. They are protecting those who are undergoing the transformation from forces that would seek to derail it. The ancient Mesopotamian mystery teachings speak of the cycling of ages, of great epochs in which consciousness expands, peaks, and then contracts before beginning again at a higher level. The Sumerian king list speaks of antediluvian ages lasting thousands of years. The Hindu Vedas speak of the yugas, the great ages lasting tens of thousands of years. The Mayan calendar marked vast cycles of time. All of these systems share a common understanding that human history is not random or accidental, but follows a pattern. We are patterns riding on patterns. Consciousness is cycling through specific phases, and we, living in this moment, are participants in one of the most dramatic transitions in the entire cycle. We are being offered the opportunity to ascend to a higher stage of development, but the choice remains individual. The cherubim do not force. They invite, they protect the path, but each soul must walk it of its own volition. The role of the pagan wisdom in this transformation is essential. For centuries, the Christian and Islamic traditions dominated the spiritual landscape of the Western world and the Middle East and beyond. This dominance was not entirely negative. These traditions preserved important truths and brought spiritual benefits to billions of people. But they also represented a contraction in consciousness, a narrowing of perspective, an imprisonment of spiritual knowledge within institutional structures. The recovery of pagan wisdom, the remembrance of the ancient mysteries, the recognition that the goddess traditions and the earth-based spiritualities and the mystery schools held truths that complemented and expanded upon the monotheistic revelations, represents an expansion of consciousness. We are recovering a fuller picture of the divine reality. We are recognizing that the masculine and feminine principles, the light and the darkness, the manifest and the unmanifest, are all necessary expressions of the ultimate reality. We are learning to hold paradox and contradiction without forcing everything into a single, literalistic interpretation. This does not mean a wholesale rejection of the Abrahamic traditions or a return to ancient paganism as it existed thousands of years ago. It means an integration. It means taking the best from all traditions. It means recognizing that the truths taught by Buddha, by Jesus, by Socrates, by the Hindu rishis, by the Sufi saints, by the shamans and priestesses of ancient times, are all expressions of the same underlying reality perceived from different angles, at different times, in different cultural contexts. The serpent of wisdom and the cherubim guardians were never enemies. They were complementary principles that exist together in all authentic spiritual systems. The serpent represents the ascending force of consciousness, the drive toward knowledge and self-realization. The cherubim represent the descending force of divine order, the maintenance of structure and sacred law. Both are necessary. Both must be honored. Both must be integrated within the human being who seeks wholeness. The specific teaching of the cherubim for our time is this: the barrier is real. It is not an illusion to be denied. There is a genuine difference between the prepared and the unprepared, between those who have undergone spiritual discipline and purification and those who have not. Not everyone can immediately perceive the higher dimensions of reality. Not everyone is capable of directly encountering the divine presence without being shattered by it. The guardians of the threshold still function. They still test the worthiness of those who approach. The flaming sword still burns away illusion and ego, but for those who are sincere, who are willing to undergo the necessary discipline, who are willing to confront their shadows and purify their intentions, the barrier becomes not an obstacle, but a gateway. The cherubim become allies. They become initiators. They guide the aspirant through the dangerous threshold into the sacred space beyond. The collective humanity is now approaching this threshold. not all at once, but in waves. The first wave of awakened individuals is already crossing over. They are the ones who have begun to perceive beyond the illusions of the material world. They are the ones who have recognized the interconnection of all things. They are the ones who have begun to access states of consciousness that the ordinary mind cannot comprehend. They are becoming the bridge between the old world and the new world. They are helping to prepare the way for the waves that follow. In the mystery school tradition, these advanced souls are called the elect, the Illuminati, the awakened ones, not in the sense of secret conspiracies, but in the sense of those who have consciously participated in their own evolution. The path for each individual is the same path that has been walked since time immemorial. It is the path of self-knowledge. Know thyself, said the ancient Greeks, inscribed above the entrance to the temple of Apollo at Delphi. This knowing is not intellectual. It is direct perception of one's true nature, stripped of all the conditioning and programming and false beliefs that have been layered on top of the soul since birth. It involves confronting one's shadow, the disowned parts of oneself that one refuses to acknowledge. It involves radical honesty about one's desires, fears, motivations, and attachments. It involves practicing the virtues, compassion, integrity, courage, wisdom, justice. It involves meditation and contemplation, the turning of attention inward to perceive the subtle dimensions of consciousness that are normally hidden. It involves service to something greater than oneself, the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and security for the sake of a higher purpose. As one undergoes this process, the cherubim gradually reveal themselves, not as obstacles, but as protectors and guides. The flaming sword becomes a tool of purification rather than an instrument of exclusion. The guardian beings begin to appear in dreams, visions, and moments of deep meditation. They communicate without words, transmitting knowledge directly from their consciousness to the consciousness of the aspirant. They show the seeker the hidden pathways. They warn against pitfalls. They celebrate victories and encourage persistence through trials. They teach the ancient secrets that were preserved in the mystery schools, now being transmitted to a growing circle of worthy aspirants. The journey toward the tree of life, toward the resurrection of immortality, becomes not a distant promise, but a present reality. The fruits of the tree begin to be tasted. The return to Eden occurs not in some future afterlife, but in the present moment. This is the revelation contained in the pagan mysteries, preserved and encoded in the Genesis narrative, hidden and protected by the cherubim for thousands of years, and now being unveiled in our time. The two cherubim standing at the eastern gate are not the final word. They are the beginning of the conversation. They are an invitation to transformation. They are the guardians of the threshold that you must pass to become fully human, to become conscious co-creators with the divine, to recover the divine nature that was never truly lost, but only obscured. The serpent that offered knowledge was offering what the human soul desperately needed. The cherubim that enforce the boundary are protecting what the unprepared soul cannot yet safely handle. The flaming sword that turns every way is the continuous test that weeds out the false and confirms the true. Together, these principles ensure that the evolution of consciousness proceeds according to the divine pattern, that free will is honored, that each soul is treated with perfect justice, and that nothing is left to chance. This is the ancient pagan truth that has been hidden for thousands of years. This is the message of the cherubim. This is the call that echoes across the millennia, reaching your ears now, in this moment, inviting you to awaken, to remember, to reclaim your divine inheritance, and to step through the gateway that has been guarded since the beginning of time.